For a game all about lying, Lies of P is surprisingly sincere. I remember seeing clips of a Pinocchio-themed Souls-like a few years ago, never quite believing it was real. There's something about being entrenched in internet culture that makes you believe that nothing really exists until it's in front of you. I'm very glad I was wrong about Lies of P. In Lies of P, you play Pinocchio, a puppet, as one might imagine, who finds himself in an abandoned train in Krat train station. This city is where you'll spend the majority of your time, and it's recently become overrun in maniacal puppets hell-bent on destroying their masters. Seeing some semblance of humanity in yourself, you aren't driven by the same desires. Like Carlo Collodi's Like Carlo Collodi's original novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio, Lies of P is somewhat on the virtue of lying and how those morally grey actions are part of what makes us human. Is it Carlo Collodi? Collodi? I don't know, I'm off track already. I could talk a lot more about the narrative themes and the lore and what it means to me, but I feel like I'll be digesting this game for a long time. That's part of the charm of Souls-likes. Out of the gate, Lies of P's combat is fast and frenetic. Swings hit hard and you're punished when caught in between actions, but it does do two things that keep you going. The first is the guard regain mechanic. Every time you take damage, a little bar appears in your health bar, and when you hit back, it comes back. It's sort of like Bloodborne's health mechanic. This means that every time you take a hit, you're incentivized to hit back. In some of the more methodical action games, you take a step back when you get hit and you can regroup. In Lies of P, you're punished for doing so. Then, after this, there are pulse cells, which are small Estus-like items that restore at Stargazer, Lies of P's version of bonfires. Once these are fully depleted, you can gain one back by just doing enough damage to enemies. This is a really fun turn on the genre and means that you're almost incentivized to use up all of your healing items and just push on forward. This makes exploration both a fun challenge and oddly grueling. That next corridor could send you to somewhere safe or straight into your death. You could take a step back and go all the way back to the last Stargazer, or you could try and push through and gain a couple more healing items. Adding to this, Lies of P has a perfect guard system instead of a more traditional parry. When you decide to block damage, well, decide is a little bit more intentional than I think is most of my uses of the blocking game. When you block, you take reduced damage and some stamina consumption. But if you block just in time to get a perfect guard, you take no damage to your health but a little bit to your stamina. This means that either you could fully commit to your perfect guard system with quartz cells, which end up infusing some abilities, or you could invest in your stamina, which lets you roll out of the way quicker. Like Dark Souls, there is iframes, but they can be a little bit more punishing due to a different mechanic. I'll talk about that later. Unfortunately, this does lead to some problems when it comes to world building. Outside of a few side quests and grinding, which is often necessary for some bosses, you aren't really incentivized to backtrack. Even when you revisit some of the areas from earlier on, they get a new makeup, a new makeover, and they're treated in very different spaces. Instead of, there's a fast travel system which I'll get to later, instead of appearing where they were before, they become a new place, which kind of means that you don't visit the old places again. Instead of backtracking, you're instead retracking things you've already seen. Because of this, its placement of shortcuts never really means that you get access to other areas from where you are. Instead of your third area leading back to your first one in ways that evolve the world and make it feel different, your shortcuts are very, very singular and linked to the place you're in. Within 5 minutes of the Stargazer you're at, you might have come across a shortcut, but it's never going to lead any further than that. Unfortunately, this makes the world feel very small and not interconnected. Once you've figured out how this shortcut system works, you can use it to skip past a lot of the enemies in the game. I know that this shortcut I found, or the potential of a shortcut I found, I can just run past the next 5 minutes and I'll get to it. Other games will never fully incentivize exploring for that shortcut while skipping the enemies because you never know where it's going to end up, whereas in Lies of P it's very singular. This makes that organic world building feel a little bit more synthetic, though you'll quickly come running back once you've hit those bosses. On the whole, boss design is aesthetically very interesting and quite clever. Things come together in ways that fit the aesthetic of the world. Enemies are gruesome, but they're also engrossing. They're interesting. They have flaws in their design. They have chips that might make you think, what have they done before this? I find that very interesting when you come across them. When you take them on for the third or fourth time, you're not just learning their mechanics, you're learning what makes them tick. A really interesting idea that comes up at the very start is the first boss you can't fully understand. You can make out some letters, and if you kind of squint, you might be able to see what the sentences mean, but you can never fully understand it. This leads you to picking up certain words as you take on the boss for the second or third or fourth time. And I find that incentivizes taking them on again in ways that's quite intriguing. As well as this, when you die, your souls, or ergo, pops up in front of the door to the boss rather than in the area. If something's a little bit too difficult, you can pick up your ergo and go back again. This means that while some of the bosses are a little bit less well designed than you might expect in mechanics, it doesn't punish you too heavily for running into a boss unprepared. Unfortunately, there's a decent bit of inconsistency in these bosses near the end of the game. I managed to defeat the first stage of the second last boss almost without taking a hit. I took the moves, I learned them out, and I felt really good playing it, and then that second phase comes in. That first attack they'll do will shred 80% of your health, and it's unblockable, which is a part of this parry mechanic. When they turn red, you have to get that perfect guard. You can't dodge out of the way, you don't have your traditional iframes, so you're forced into learning the game how it works. This works in a game like Sekiro, where your character has a specific build and specific weapons, and they're made intentionally. Lies of P incentivizes you to learn new weapons and to change around your class. It has great swords and daggers. It has different forms of attacks. When you get to the second boss and you realize the game is forcing you into a certain playstyle, it starts to feel hollow. This is particularly true in my experience and those I've spoken to when it comes to that second last boss. They're so quick that great swords just won't hit them in time. You'll always end up tanking damage, and Pinocchio is very, very squishy. When I swapped over to a dagger, I did it very, very quickly, but trying to brute force it with a great sword just didn't work out for me. Fortunately, some of that backtracking you do is made much greater by the fast travel system. You get this very, very quickly, and when certain side quests open up, NPCs will pop up on that fast travel board showing you where to go and where to come from. I quite enjoy this, especially as it's got a central hub world it's built upon. Then, when you know there's a couple of NPCs to talk to, it will inform you. Ultimately, this is part of how I feel about Lies of P. It does a really good job at exploring and fixing a lot of small issues I have with Souls-like as a whole, which is a genre I'm a big fan of, by making very tiny quality of life improvements. The way things move, the way things flow, everything about it feels thoughtful and designed with a love of the genre. This leads me to my final feelings on Lies of P. Aesthetically, it's a triumph with one of the more unique takes I've seen on the genre, but it's also very heavily a Souls-like. A lot of the things it thrives in are taken straight from its influences. This is not a bad thing, but certainly something you should be aware of before getting into it. Though its aesthetics is great and there's emotional depth to exploring the chasms of its story, it's not going to change your mind on things you've seen before. You'll only really like it if you've been bitten by that Souls-like bug. What a monstrous and horrible bug that is. If you have any more questions, feel free to answer them. If you want to know about these guys, let me show these off. I very intentionally didn't want to clear them. This guy here is an anteater who says, "I like ants," or "ants are yummy." This guy here